Well,
So
thank you, Sue. So our guest tonight is Jason Barabas, and he is the director of the Rockefeller Center for Public Policy and the Social Sciences, as well as a professor in the Department of Government. Dr. Barabas earned his undergraduate degree in government from Dartmouth in 1993 and his Ph.D. in political science from Northwestern University. While at Dartmouth, Barabas played football on 3 Ivy League championship teams, and he worked as an intern in the White House Office of Media Affairs. After graduating from Dartmouth, Jason was appointed as an economic policy advisor for the governor of Illinois. Currently, Professor Barabas teaches and conducts research on public policy and opinion preferences. Dr. Barabas has published more than a dozen articles in top-ranked journals such as the American Political Science Review, American Journal of Political Science, and Journal of Politics. It's a pleasure to say hello and welcome home to such a distinguished son of Dartmouth. Jason?
Thank you so much, Kim, and everyone else for inviting me and for listening to my talk later tonight. So it is a delight to be back in Hanover, and this has been an odd time. So I'll go through that in my remarks, talking about just the challenges of being on campus and in this building in the Rockefeller Center during the COVID pandemic. But hopefully there's some optimism on the horizon, and so I look forward to sharing with you some of my impressions during the 6 to 8 months that I've been here, and really you'll get a sense of the Rockefeller Center writ large. Many of you probably know some of our programming and events, but if you don't, I hope you will take the time to investigate some of the things we have. There's some upcoming talks that I'll mention as well that could possibly be things that you want to stop in and take advantage of. So I'm going to, at this point, share my screen and go through a presentation. I don't mind stopping and answering questions, but there'll certainly be time for questions afterward as well. And with any of this, feel free to follow up with me afterward. I'm on a lot of the Dartmouth web pages and whatnot, and I hope one day to see you at Dartmouth events and be in person at some point too. So let's get going. And hopefully you should be able to see my presentation.
Yep, we're good.
Good. All right. And all right. So this is a presentation that's going to collect a lot of different Rockefeller themes. So Rocky, as the Rockefeller Center is often called, that's our nickname. I'm going to talk to you about Nelson Rockefeller, a 1930 graduate of Dartmouth, and as well as a project that I have going on the political affiliations of people who were enamored with Nelson Rockefeller and sort of fell under that umbrella. And then we'll sort of use that to take us into the current era and everything that's going on in Washington and the country more generally. So as you just heard, I'm the director of the Rockefeller Center for Public Policy and Social Sciences. It certainly doesn't look like this. We don't have leaves or anything like that yet, and the snow is still apparent but melting quickly. This is a shot on the right from our founding era, and especially down on the bottom right when the building was dedicated in 1983. So I had really just been on campus. I graduated in 1993, so it was really in its first 10 years of existence. It's a beautiful space, and I'll show you that in a moment. But what the Rockefeller Center today looks like is much different than what it looked like when I was an undergraduate. This is a shot that's very recent. So this is the interior of that same building. And unfortunately, as you see, the space is closed because of COVID. But ordinarily, there would be students just throughout this whole building, and lots of great little study nooks and places that you might have even frequented over the years. Off to the right is sort of a big lectern atrium area, and I'm actually sitting just off to that where the red circle is. So I'm been through that door in the director's office. But what I wanted to draw attention to was the poster that's right outside the door, and here's a blow up of that poster. It's a nice way to kind of get a bird's eye view of the Rockefeller Center and all that we do. And I'm going to dive into these various categories and buckets in just a moment. But overall, it's something that Dartmouth students take advantage of throughout their time at Dartmouth. We have in the black you see in there in the center, it's sort of the first year fellows program. A lot of people that are taking some public policy courses or statistics, methodology prerequisites, but then that sets them up for other things like civic skills training. And then some of them choose to go into our other public policy courses. I'll talk about that in a moment as well. You see other categories there, such as training and leading. We have a lot of leadership training and education courses. I'm going to talk to you about a few of those as well. We also sponsor a lot of research for both faculty and students. And then the track oval that's at the surrounding all of that, we do a lot of public events. I'm going to show you just a few of them that we've done in the past few weeks, as well as in one of them that's coming up too that might be of interest in people in the Dartmouth Valley Club, Dartmouth Club of the Upper Valley. All of that hopefully will lead to many different careers. Here's just a few examples of ways that people translate their time from the Rockefeller Center and the public policy minor and participation in leadership programs into these professions, but certainly many others as well. And you'll see here that there's our website. It's also featured here at the bottom. So I'm not going to be able to really do it justice. And there's so many really amazing people who work at the Rockefeller Center and have worked here for more than a decade, many of them. Incredible staff on both the curricular side, the courses, if you will, the research side, and then the co-curricular side, the leadership training education side. I'm going to go on our website. You see these categories of public policy, leadership, funding, which you're going to see a lot of internships and things like that we provide for students, as well as news and events. So you can go into each of these categories later if you want to follow up with any of this. And there's the website down there. Just a few overall stats from our annual report, our most recent annual report, just so you can kind of see overall there, we're serving a big chunk of the Dartmouth undergraduate student body. So there's 400 people who in that 1920 academic year who took courses in public policy, the PBPL course title. And we have 17 students graduated with the minor. Overall, we offered 15 different courses. So we are larger, I should say, than some actual departments in a lot of ways, which is kind of interesting. So it's definitely something that people pair, and I'm going to show you that. They pair it with a lot of different majors on campus. Before I do that, though, you can see also we do a lot of faculty support through bringing, this is a photo in the bottom right, a former senator from New Hampshire in Lisa Valdez's class. We also have opportunities to send students abroad. DC can seem abroad, but that's actually in the United States. So we do a lot of DC fellowships. You'll see on the next slide, but this is also our PBPL 85, the Global Policy Leadership, where people go to, let's say, the Eurozone and meet with people who've been dealing with funding crises or any other public policy challenges, and then it's sort of a policy-based, foreign study, if you will. All right. I mentioned earlier that there are a lot of different majors associated with the public policy minor. And so this is a visualization that a woman who's been working with me, she's a senior this year, Margaret Hubble, put this together in terms of trying to just show the diversity of different majors that is associated with the public policy minor. And you can see from the website at the bottom, it's one of the part of the Rockefeller Center ethos is to build bridges across different disciplines. So instead of a sort of, we bridge many different parts of campus. You see here almost 20 different bubbles here, and very diverse too. So English, philosophy, anthropology, biology, chemistry, psychology. Some of the bigger ones, if we were to size them, government and economics would certainly be a big part of this, but we do have a lot of people taking the minor from a variety of different interdisciplinary background. One of the things that I wanted to mention too, especially in relation to this club, is how much the Rockefeller Center helps with the public policy side in Vermont and New Hampshire. So those two states, compared to New York or other very very well funded, institutionalized state governments, though they don't have a lot of people doing the research on policy issues. And so for a large part, over the last 15, 20 years, those have been Dartmouth students that are going into Vermont and New Hampshire to testify on a range of different issues, and they put together these very impressive reports. I was showing you one of them here that was published on our website just last year, homelessness in the Upper Valley and what are the policy solutions there. There are a number of other ones, and I can't even really go into each of them. I've pulled out a few of them: food insecurity, wind farms, juvenile justice, 5G wireless rollout in Vermont. You see a range of different issues. So we're not a one issue entity. We really span the entire gamut. We tend to partner with other units on campus, such as the Dickey Center, when it comes to international affairs or policy. And you see in the purple there, those are some of the partnership areas on something called the Global Health Policy Lab. So we work with Dickey and train students, and then they go to Kosovo, or they go to Peru, or there's others in Nepal and other areas too. So it's not just in the Upper Valley, it tends to go beyond, but I would say the Vermont, New Hampshire, especially the Upper Valley, that's our real strength. So hopefully, the lives of everyone sort of on this Zoom call will be touched and made better by some of the efforts of students doing research, trying to figure out what good public policy would look like. And I should say that we're non-advocacy, so it's not a matter of that we have a particular point of view we want to push. It's a lot of it's evidence-based and looking at what works in other states and whatnot. I mentioned earlier that we have co-curricular programs, sometimes years ago called extracurricular. So this is beyond the actual classwork and classes that people are taking each of the terms. We run 4 very well-developed leadership training and education programs. Really, they could be pieced in at any different part of the Dartmouth undergraduate experience. People tend to take that D-Lab, Dartmouth Leadership and Attitudes program, in their first year, and then RLF, the Rockefeller Leadership Fellows program, is tending to be in the last year. And they're fitting these other programs in throughout their D plan. But nearly 400 students take advantage of this in the most recent annual report. And that's a good chunk of the people who are on campus at any given time. This year, of course, with COVID, a lot of these programs had to transition to be remote. So that's one thing that the staff has just done an incredible job, taking these programs and shifting them online in pretty quick order, just as things are going on. So I'm really proud of them. We also do a lot of public events, and of course, 2020 was chock full of one challenge after another. COVID, the economy, and then of course the race situation. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. It just goes on and on. So one of the things we wanted to do is to put in some programming that brought in the social science surrounding policing and race. And so you see several people across disciplines that came in October to talk about this. And by the way, these talks are available on our Rockefeller Center website because the Zoom recording of them. So that's something that the pandemic made possible, and it's something that we've continued. The book over on the right by Frank Baumgartner was the speaker, but Derek Epp, the second author there, was a Rockefeller Center postdoctoral fellow. He went to the University of North Carolina. I think he's in Austin, at the University of Texas, Austin right now. So he's part of that book about what 20 million traffic stops in North Carolina tell us about race and policing. So again, whenever we can, bring social science and data into these policy debates. And that was a good event. Here are a couple of events that took place just in the last few weeks, again, to show you the diversity of different topics that we're talking about. On the left, Ann Alstott came from Yale Law, and she spoke in my class, and she also gave a great public presentation, very accessible, on public option policies writ large. She has a book with a co-author at Vanderbilt on the public option generally, but then she really focused on all of the other programs that we don't even think about that are really public options, such as the post office. Social Security falls into that too. So lots of different ways to kind of think about that as a policy option with everything else that is going on. And then on the right was an event I just did a couple of weeks ago with 2 Tuck professors, including Kurt Welling, who's a class of 1971 graduate, and that was on GameStop, Robinhood, and Reddit, and then what the implications were for regulation of stock trading, and you saw some very unusual political combinations there where, Ted Cruz is working with, his liberal, adversaries, potentially on the same side of the issue. So it brought together a really interesting collection of folks, and it, these stocks and some of the issues are still going on even today. Coming up, and this, I wanted to mention this as possible event of interest to people, especially that are listening in tonight. So this upcoming in April of this year, we've got Nicholas Christakis, who's a MD sociologist, who's written a book. I've got it here in front of me too, Apollo's Arrow. It's about the pandemic, but it goes across time, really a broad view. So I'm just getting into it, and that's going to be an event on April 8th in the evening that you can visit. Here's on the left is a Valley News article about Nicholas Christakis, because even though he's at Yale, I believe he lives either all the time or many days in Norwich. So he's relatively local. Nicholas was actually my boss for a little while. He was at Harvard Medical School, and I did a postdoctoral fellowship under him, social sciences writ large. So that'll be good to get in touch with him again. So I encourage all of you. I'm going to try to get ahead with my reading ahead of that event as well. All right, so back to more traditional kind of events and student-facing. Rockefeller Center is a very student-facing organization, as the language here locally. So we do so much of our programming is directed towards students. And you see, we helped fund and find 67 fellowships, internships in many different places. So I've had just a few of them shown there on the bottom right. Many years ago, in the early 90s, as Kim mentioned, I was an intern in Washington, D.C., and I was able to get some Rockefeller funding to help do that. So I'm a beneficiary of this, and it's something that ultimately led to my honors thesis, and it was just a great sort of transformational experience. So it's something that is very helpful to keep going, and we have a lot of there's a lot of testimonials on our website where you can hear more about student experiences as well. Again, because of COVID, a lot of that has gone remote, and so we're still trying to support those, and hopefully we'll get back to an in-person situation in the near future. One other new wrinkle, my background is in public opinion polling, public policy. I've written some articles on the dearth of public policy polling. And so one of the things we hope to get running here is a high quality Dartmouth-Rockefeller survey on public policy issues. I've got the students in my advanced seminar in public policy really working on some of the pilot versions of this, and they're assessing the national issue agenda. So I've got a lot of papers waiting for me in my inbox to kind of look at this. But hopefully this is going to be an opportunity to both provide a really high quality research product from Dartmouth, that's Dartmouth branded. All of you, because I hope to have over samples of Vermont and New Hampshire. So if you're living in the Upper Valley, you're going to most likely be in the sampling frame. You might get selected randomly for inclusion in this and that. So be on the lookout for that. There will also hopefully be a lot of opportunities for students who are current students, but also I'm very interested in this period after students graduate, but before they go on to do amazing things. Sometimes it's helpful to have a year or two, and we're trying to create these post-baccalaureate opportunities for people too. So that's another new wrinkle to the Rockefeller Center. Okay, so now on to Rockefeller himself. So Nelson A. Rockefeller, class of 1930. You see a photo from right there on the left. He was a 4-year soccer player, and you see also in the camera club for 4 years. So really interesting story. Good student. You see here at that second paragraph says Rockefeller was dyslexic. So he really made a lot from his reading disorder. You're going to see that factor in my presentation a bit later for his reliance on experts and whatnot. So just a little bit of a background. I've been working with some students to kind of on a couple of different aspects of Rockefeller's life, and one of the most important was just to kind of situate him with this name you hear if you're certainly in New York City, Rockefeller Center, and just the storied family here. So John D. Rockefeller Sr. up in the top left, founder of Standard Oil, one of the depending on which website you're looking at, possibly, the wealthiest person in the United States ever, or certainly of the era. And so his son was John D. Rockefeller Jr., and then John D. Rockefeller Jr. had 6 children, and you see Nelson Rockefeller being the third child there, and a 1930s graduate. We've continued this family tree just a little bit to show you Nelson Rockefeller, his marriage to Mary Todd, as well as his subsequent marriage to Happy Rockefeller, and the children that those marriages produced. And also in green, you see a real Dartmouth thread running through all of this as well. So Rodman Rockefeller, he was pictured in that one of my early slides with the dedication of the building. He was very instrumental in doing the fundraising for the Rockefeller Center, as well as the dedication of the building. And then certainly a lot of the children of Nelson Rockefeller. I've had conversations with Nelson Rockefeller Jr. Just a few months ago. And then right now, Peter and Michael, so Michael Rockefeller is an 86, who's on our board of visitors as well too. So I'll be interacting with him next month as well. All right, so another little, unexpected but interesting aspect of Rockefeller beyond the political, which that's where I'm going to spend most of my time. But Rockefeller was also a patron of the arts, and so he has an extensive art collection. Dartmouth actually owns, you see on the left, Nelson Rockefeller gave this Picasso to Dartmouth, and it's one of the multi-million-dollar pieces that they have. So in another era, I encourage you to visit it. I'm going to try to set up opportunities for both my students and also people who are associated with Rockefeller Center to view that piece, but really went far beyond it. It had a real taste for sort of art from Latin America, but also modern art at that time. So in the 40s and 50s, the Picassos, the Pollocks, all kinds of avant-garde art for that time. Nelson Rockefeller and his mother were instrumental in setting up the MoMA in New York, and he was president of MoMA, I think twice, 39 to 41 and 46 to 53. He was a trustee of the Modern Museum of Art from 39 through 79, I believe, are the years. So can you imagine being, a trustee of MoMA 9 years after graduating, right, from Dartmouth? So really, really incredible. That just kind of rounding out the picture here. I'm going to transition into the political realm. Christina Javins is a 23 sophomore that you see pictured here on the left. She's been working with me all year on those other projects, the art project, the family tree project, and then we were really starting to dive into the political side of Rockefeller and this legacy of Rockefeller Republicans, right? So she was awarded a grant from Dartmouth College more generally, not just the Rockefeller Center, but to help me work on the research underlying this. So I want to provide a big shout out to her. We've given this presentation actually jointly to the class of 1971. And so she's hopefully learning a lot in the process, and we'll be doing more in the spring term as well coming up. So you see a picture there of Rockefeller running in 64. He ran for president, depending on how you count it, 2 to 3 times, especially in 64 was really pivotal one. Let me build back up to that just by situating it in the Republican politics today, right? So, we started before the talk began talking about everything that happened in January of 2021 in Washington, D.C., and then the repercussions for that for the country, but also specifically within the Republican Party. Is there a civil war, or is it already over? What's happening? You see very a lot of firing within the Republican Party at each other. And Trump, when he was at the CPAC conference, talked about really going after his critics, people who, Liz Cheney and others who were not sufficiently supportive of him. So very interesting moment in American politics that I think help us think about what Rockefeller's role in that, and really, it was a path not taken in many ways, as you'll see. So there is a very good book on Rockefeller. I started getting into this by reading a whole bunch of biographies on Nelson Rockefeller, and one of the ones I really recommend to you, and that Christina has read, and you'll see quotes here later in a moment, is this Richard Norton Smith book, on his own terms, The Life of Nelson Rockefeller. And so Norton Smith was in Hanover celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Rockefeller Center And there's a YouTube video that you can follow back if you want to see that whole presentation. So many of a lot of underlying historical information is going to be drawn from that and other biographies. Just as a little overall summary of Rockefeller, he was a 4-term governor of New York, right? So that's not easy to do, as we're seeing, with the current situation in New York. So 3-term Andrew Cuomo. So he's a 4-term governor of New York, amazingly active in many different policy spaces. So vastly expanded the SUNY higher education system into one of the largest of the world, from under 40,000 students to more than 250,000 by the time he was done with his gubernatorial years. I just recently came from the SUNY system, so I was a faculty member, professor of political science at Stony Brook University on Long Island. So I had seen that university, founded in the late 50s. I'd seen a lot of those expansions as well. But at the same time, champion of clean air and water in the state of New York, spending more than the federal government on environmental concerns at that time. Support for the arts. So I mentioned earlier, been president of Roma, racially integrated housing, transportation, prison and criminal justice, known for some harsh, anti-drug laws and sort of prison riots and things like that. So I would say it's not uniformly, left of center, because there's, they're even now trying to undo some of those criminal justice programs in the state of New York. But at any rate, a very interesting collection of political beliefs, especially given the context today. He was the vice president for Gerald Ford from 1974 to 77. Interestingly enough, this Norton Smith book says that Hubert Humphrey, a Democrat, wanted Nelson Rockefeller on his ticket, right? So imagine a ticket that had a Democrat and Republican at the top level, and Gerald Ford did not elect to have Nelson Rockefeller, even though he was a sitting vice president. He was sort of bumped from the ticket in 1976 in favor of Bob Dole, in part because they wanted to burnish their conservative credentials, and there were a lot of Black Republicans, especially, who were not really happy with that decision. So there's a wonderful book by Leah Wright-Rigora, another Dartmouth grad in 03, who's at Harvard, and she has a book on the loneliness of the Black Republican and just how upsetting it was for many African Americans in the United States who were had been helped by Nelson Rockefeller, or thought he would be a good influence there, and he was not on that ticket. So an amazing moment in American politics. I want to go into some of the policy positions just anecdotally, as well as through survey data in the next few slides, and then I'll open it up for questions. But here's one we have. I'm going to show you some slides later on energy policy, climate change, and whatnot. But Nelson Rockefeller being very interested in moving away from fossil fuels. Think about that as an heir to the Standard Oil fortune, being ready to move away from that. So that's just one little anecdotal quote there. There's another one on civil rights. He thought he was going to pay a political price. I mean, people told him, listen, that's not the way things are going. People were upset with the civil rights legislation in the 60s, of course, the race riots and everything like that in the 60s. But he was really kind of morally committed to this topic, and talked about having certain rights and responsibilities, and one of them is going to be in the field of civil rights. Here's a picture of him with a lot of different folks. As I said earlier, he was no stranger to experts and task forces. He would call extensive panels together and produce reports. Very like a think tank almost. That's how it's described a lot of times. So really, from a public policy standpoint, he was not afraid of pulling together people, experts, and putting them in the room. And you see him pictured down there with Gerald Ford, but also Henry Kissinger as well. And when he was Undersecretary, Deputy Secretary of Health and Education and Welfare, so the modern predecessor, I think, of Health and Human Services. You see a couple pictures of Rockefeller here with Kennedy, with LBJ in the middle, and with Nixon. Nixon, again, almost selected him. It was kind of interesting Republican politics going on there. On the Kennedy one, I'll come back to this a little bit more in the next few slides too, but Rockefeller in that 60 contest was thinking about getting in. He had just been elected governor, so it was really kind of early in that whole thing. So he was never quite, probably, that race for 64 would have been maybe the ideal time. And so he was actually attacking Kennedy from the left, though, on civil rights, not saying that he wasn't progressive enough. So, incredible, story when it comes to Republican politics. And again, something that you're gonna see play out in the data in a few moments. So, on partisanship, he's just often described as having a Democratic heart with a Republican head. So this really interesting hybrid, if you will. He was described by R.W. Apple of the New York Times as being too liberal for the Republicans and too conservative for the Democrats. You see him, over here pictured on the bottom left with George Romney. This is Mitt Romney's father, another sort of moderate Republican. And, they're talking about bankrolling Dr. Martin Luther King in the South. And so that was, just at a time when there's kind of the South was realigning itself and a lot of conservative Democrats were coming over. And so that was a really risky position for many times. This whole idea of Rockefeller Republicans comes back, and you see an article from 2016 race. So from Buffalo saying that, well, these Rockefeller Republicans are scarce these days. So it is a brand you'll see in a moment that has been, I don't want to call it extinct, but it's sort of on an endangered species list for a lot of reasons. Okay, just a few policy positions where you still see echoes of these Rockefeller Republicans in this disjuncture between, I think, what the media sort of portraying Republicans as being uniformly conservative, but there's a lot more beneath the surface here. So this is from a 2019 poll from the Pew Research Center, and we'll have a few more of these. But because the minimum wage was in the news recently, I thought it'd be interesting to kind of look at this. So you see conservative Republicans not being especially supportive of a $15 minimum wage, but look at that moderate and liberal Republicans. If we group both of those, almost 60% support. And that, and what we wanted to focus on, Christina and I wanted you to focus on, is this 29-point gap. So a huge difference, even switching majorities between these two things here. When I go to the next slide, and it's not advancing, there it goes. Okay, so on climate change, another thing that's on a lot of people's minds. We've got Earth Day coming up in about a month or so. So again, is the federal government doing too little to reduce the effects of climate change? Conservative Republicans not being so supportive of that particular statement, but these liberal moderate Republicans 41 percentage points higher on that, and even majority who would endorse that idea. Developing fossil fuels as an alternative, again, 82% support for these liberal moderate Republicans, under 50% for the conservative Republicans. This, by the way, would not look all that different from actual, card-carrying Democrats in that sample. And then again, if you flip it and say, is that going to hurt? Are these policies going to hurt the economy? That not being something that these liberal Republicans endorse, but certainly something the conservative Republicans endorse. So there's heterogeneity and diversity within the Republican coalition that are probably underappreciated even in 2019. When we looked across these issues that you see up here, including the ones you just saw, but also immigration, COVID-19, universal basic income, which has been in the news a lot, abortion, you're going to see double-digit 25 to 30-point gaps in the policy preferences between these things. So again, what I'm seeing is just part of me directing the center, but just really trying to understand, especially with political scientists, what does Nelson Rockefeller, what did he stand for, and do we see those sort of legacies even today? And this graph is going to put that in context, put everything I just talked about in context. So this is a survey, one of two surveys I'll show you. It's called the General Social Survey. So an over time look at liberal and moderate Republicans grouped together, and this is so there's about 17% of the people in the entire sample, a couple thousand people in the mid 70s who said they were liberal or moderate, and you see in red is the conservative Republicans, and it starts to go every other year. That's why the lines don't connect later. But important takeaway here is that in the mid 70s, there were more liberals and moderates than there were conservative Republicans, and you see the two Republicans in general becoming more prevalent, but still a lot of folks kind of in both of these buckets. And then really the disjuncture in the early 1990s, mid 1990s, where you get after the Reagan years, and especially after the Newt Gingrich Revolution in 1994 election, you start to see this disjuncture. Still a little bit of a tail up there, but still not a very, not a lot of folks in this camp. Here's another data series from the American National Election Studies. Again, it's showing roughly the same picture. It doesn't, now the liberal moderate Republicans are not numerically, more numerous in that early period, but you still see that they're much closer together, almost at parity, but then this separation, especially as you get beyond the 1990s into the 2000s. And so some of these surveys, 10% you see there in 2016 as the last point. I just looked at some survey data from the fall of 2020, and a nationwide survey, it could be under 10% now in terms of identifiers with that particular combination. So just a few more slides, and then I'll open it up here. So here are several different books in political science talking about ideology and partisanship. And in particular, there's this concept in the first book by Grossman and Hopkins, a little bit in the second one too by Ellison Stimson, of this idea of conflicted conservative. So conservative is a very attractive brand or label in the United States. People like to say that they're conservative, but when you go down to the policy positions, often they are not especially conservative policies if you go line by line on what those policies are. So it could be anything from Social Security to healthcare, a lot of different policy options that people would be, even though they're calling themselves conservatives, would be, opting for the non-conservative, whatever label you want to put on, progressive, liberal, whatever it might be. So they talk about this concept of these conflicted conservatives, and that is something that you kind of see echoes of in the last few things. We also sort of want to make a little bit of a recognition that people in general, I've been talking really about the Republican side, independents are growing, especially in the state of New Hampshire. You see a lot of people identifying as independents. So that is a whole interesting phenomenon, and a lot of people have been writing about that, including one of my colleagues, Stony Brook, Yana Krupnikov as well. All right. So you might ask yourself, why didn't Rockefeller change parties if he was policy-wise, sort of already there? And there's a lot of interesting quotes on this whole thing. Rather be pushing the GOP elephant forward than holding the donkey back. This whole concept, though, is something that, again, to connect it back into the 2021 experience, there are a couple articles in New York Times and NPR talking about using voting data, voter registration data, to look at people who are leaving the Republican Party in a non-election period. So this is after the January 6th experience. You see tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of people, 140,000 in 25 states, according to the New York Times estimate. And then this is an NPR one in some crucial battleground states, 5,000, 10,000 folks, even in Pennsylvania and Arizona, so leaving the Republican Party. So this, again, would, there's a lot of moving pieces on the board, and this is an interesting sort of development that, people are sort of coming to terms with and reconciling. So this is, again, part of the whole, interesting part of the project. I should also say that this, so you see pictured there, Rob Portman, who I actually talked to yesterday on the phone. He's a 1978 graduate of Dartmouth, U.S. Senator from Ohio. And, he's announced his retirement. He's young enough, as you see, like he was in a good position to win, and there was no obvious reason why he wanted to retire. So the call was short. I want to have him on campus, talk with him about this decision. And he's not alone. So Roy Blunt in Missouri, Toomey in Pennsylvania, Burr in North Carolina. There are a lot of Republican senators who are choosing to not run and, and give up their seats. So this is going to be some very interesting politics playing out in the next few years with respect to these senatorial contests. And Trump has talked about, maintaining his influence in those areas as well. One last thing, in the election, Stephen Colbert did resurrect this Rockefeller Republican idea. He actually thought that Biden and Harris were pretty Rockefeller Republican-y, so not, way out on the spectrum, kind of middle of the road, or a collection of, potentially policies that might place them in this camp. And that's what we see over time too, is that you talk about party polarization, but sometimes just standing in the middle, a lot of these, Republicans, seem like they're moderates now, that if we go back, years ago, that might not have been the case. So I just thought that was an interesting way to kind of round this out. And sometimes even now Democrats are being described as Rockefeller Republicans of sorts. So bottom line, it's an interesting time to be certainly directing the Rockefeller Center of Public Policy and Social Sciences, but there are also reasons to be interested in Rockefeller's life and experience. Teaches a lot going forward. So that's what I have for you today, and that I'll take your questions. Sounds like people are interested.
Jason, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
The class of '64.
Oh, yeah.
We really appreciate what you've been doing, and I loved your presentation. It raised the question as to whether or not your survey techniques should be focusing on how you can narrow the gaps between the the various parties. In other words, how to compromise, because that seems to be where the focus should be, rather than just stating the obvious. What do you think? Is there an approach there that makes sense?
Yeah, so I got into this business, the whole political science graduate school. I just about deliberation, about public policy, especially Social Security, things that are there that people have they think they have very different opinions on, but you can put people in a conference room, maybe a Rockefeller Center room, and have them hash out these differences, realize what kind of common ground they have, realize sort of the factual evidential basis behind a lot of these public policy challenges. And on occasion, I showed in my work that it's possible for people from all different walks of life to come together and want to move forward in a particular same direction. So I guess it's a really tough time to have that faith in deliberation. I will say it has been shaken over and over in the last 365 days. But with this survey that I'm talking about, it's not just asking people their views, but also then inviting groups of them into the Rockefeller Center, or maybe virtually, to have these kind of policy deliberations. So I guess I'm an optimist. It kind of runs throughout my work. I'm an optimist in a lot of different ways, and I hope that we can get to this space where people can recognize the common ground and sort of get there. I will acknowledge, though, it is very tough, especially when people hold very ironclad, hard positions, and they don't want to move off of those. So you got to create. A lot of times you have to bolster their identities. You have to really not attack them personally. And so that has not, again, been the sort of the name of the game in the last few years.
Good. Thanks, Jason.
Sure. And thanks for the class of 1964 too.
You bet.
Yeah, very supportive. Thank you.
Thank you.
We've got another. Is it Gina? Gina? You're muted. I think.
What I've been fascinated by and horrified recently was reading so much about the role that QAnon has played. How about that, with you're trying to get people to get together and so forth?
So I talked about have a common set of facts, and where everyone's working from that, and that is a huge challenge. Not impossible. There have been a lot of instances when people have sort of been really absorbed in the QAnon phenomenon, but then realize, boy, that they're not seeing these events supposedly play out, and sort of have their faith shooken in all of that. So it does take a lot. I mean, I study beyond deliberation. I study public knowledge and political knowledge more generally, and so this is sort of this glass half full kind of idea, where I'll get a survey that says 60% of people know something, and I take them to 80%. So I can be celebrated in the academic journals. I'm still never getting to 100%, even when I just showed you the correct answer. And it's not just correct by me, I try not to deal with these contested truths, but it again has been a tough set of years to be studying political knowledge when you've got QAnon. One of my colleagues, you probably have heard him or seen him on the news and whatnot, Brennan Nyan in the government department. He studies misinformation a lot. So he approaches it from I focus on what people know, and he focuses on what people don't know and why they don't know it. So that, is a whole interesting branch of work. It's the trends towards social media, the Twitter, Facebook, all the things. There's an article, I think, in maybe the Washington Post about YouTube, reinforcing. So these computer algorithms are reinforcing this. If they think you might like it, they send you more of it. So there's so much about the information provision and delivery system that makes it very challenging. However, I will say that being a part of hopefully a nonpartisan arbiter of high quality information, people coming in from all different walks of life, I'm hoping that the Rockefeller Center can play a role in getting people to sort of back to the correct beliefs.
Good, I do too.
Jason, I just grabbed the Alumni Magazine's anniversary issue. Nelson Rockefeller was ranked number 7. I love rankings and numbers and such, of the, I guess I don't even, the greatest Dartmouth graduates, Daniel Webster, number 1. Rockefeller at 7, too high, too low. He was the only vice,
Right.
He's the high, would you agree? He is the highest ranking Dartmouth elected official.
I believe that's correct. Just down the outside in the Rockefeller Center, there's a plaque that sort of honors the people who've been members of the Senate, Congress, governors. We've got a lot in that group, including some Dartmouth football players. So the governor of Delaware is a 78, John McCartney over there, and then Tom Wolfe in Pennsylvania as a governor, and then Christian Gillibrand, one of my former senator, being current Senator Angus King, I was just talking about, of course, Rob Portman, we already mentioned. So there's so many. Alex Moody in my class, a member of Congress. There are a lot of folks who have been really, attaining high elected office, but I think you're right when it comes to vice president, and then certainly I don't believe that we've had a president yet. So that there's room to grow on that. I would personally rank him a little bit higher, but it's Daniel Webster has a long, he's I think class of 1801, if I'm not mistaken. So very memorable phrases and whatnot. Rockefeller had sort of more years in the limelight, but so I think they're both worthy of mention. But we have so many other folks, that I think you're going to see through the Rockefeller Center, through these leadership development programs, through the public policy programs. We have so many people that I think you're going to start seeing in elected office in many different ways. Member of our board is Maya Wiley, who's running for mayor of New York. So so we've got people that are vying for that mantle and these high elected offices as well.
So who else has questions for us?
It's been really fun to get reacquainted with a lot of you. I see a lot of names from the past. It's good to see a lot of folks.
Can I just say something quickly?
There's Jay, member of my class.
So I'm Jay Gonzalez, class of 93 government major with Jason. And I'm not even sure what this is. I'm gathering it's an Upper Valley alum event.
We just found you on the internet.
I'm crashing from Boston. And I'm crashing it because I was on the phone with another classmate of ours, Clay Adams, a couple of days ago, who lives in Hanover.
Yep.
And he had told me that you were there at Rocky now, and I was asking him about you, and he said, oh, I keep getting these invitations and I can't make all these events, and there's one coming up. So he forwarded me the Zoom link, and that's how I ended up here. But I just wanted to say congrats. Thank you for what you're doing at Rocky. It sounds great. It was really neat to hear about all the great stuff that you've got going on.
Yeah.
And I look forward to catching up, and thanks to everyone else for letting me crash your party.
Oh, thank you so much, Jay. Good to see you again. And let's stay in touch. I know you've got public policy on your mind too, so that's important. I think we have a lot of good trips down memory lane and to get together, especially and that anybody else that's out there too. If you're one of these days, we're going to be able to do all this in person again, hopefully up in Hanover. So and certainly Boston's pretty close. So thanks for stopping in, Jay. Good to see you. And you were a soccer player like Nelson Rockefeller too, so a little bit of a connection there as well.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a question. Reading Nelson's biography there on the walls at the Rockefeller Center, I learned that he really wanted to be an architect. That his parents didn't want him to become an architect. I'm an architect, of course, so I was very interested in that. And in your research and study of him so far, what aspects have you found of his interest in architecture?
It hasn't been a focus, to be candid. I appreciate architecture. I've a year ago, I think I was in the Burj Khalifa, so like I seek out these moments to go to very interesting architectural spaces. I was reminded of the art, and then the Rockefeller Center. You know, there's an issue with Diego Rivera and some of his frescoes there, and then pulling them down. So that sort of had an architectural angle there. But yeah, so the architectural part, and really, like we're at a sort of a crossroads. Should we do the life and experience of Nelson Rockefeller or the political side? So we consciously put more of our time and effort into the political side, just working on things that were more familiar. But it's an area that I want to come to eventually and round out. And I'm hoping there are certainly the homes that he's built over the years. Those are shown in the book. I've actually had a conversation with the director of the Hood Museum, and I'm having a conversation with the director of the Hop as well. But the Hood in particular has an architectural program. Hanover has a lot of interesting architectural, the Hunters in particular, and I've asked them about events like this. So this is going to be one other hopeful possibility to look into some of the architectural advances and interests that Nelson Rockefeller said too. Do you have any in mind that come to mind for?
So two leads for you. Well, the Rockefeller Center walls reminded that the Albany and the state capitol, that he influenced the architecture there evidently. But the two leads would be, if you're interested in the mid-century architecture in the Upper Valley, then the place to start is actually in Norwich with their historical society, because they ended up doing some research in a number of programs a few years ago. So Sarah Rooker there is very good on that topic. And the Hanover Historical Society kind of tagged along with that, but you want to start with Norwich and the Hunters and their work, which is really very fascinating, very interesting. And then the other thing to look into, which is another Upper Valley thing, is to go to Woodstock and the Marsh Billings Rockefeller National Historic Park.
Vermont was off limits when I was looking for places to take some of my relatives. Yeah, so that's on our list.
Okay, that'll be good. And because Lawrence and Mary developed the Billings Farm part of things, and then left their home, which was the birthplace of one of the other 25 most influential Dartmouth graduates, George Perkins Marsh, was his home, to be a national park there, and an endowed national park. So that's it was partly to support Woodstock economy, but it's also to push some of the environmental ideas. So it's a nice resource if you're doing research and so on, because they do have archives there.
Thank you for those tips. I'm writing them down, and I do plan to follow up. And I'm email from me as well on this, because you seem pretty knowledgeable. So I appreciate it, and I do. That's pretty much a Dartmouth ethos too. Is to there's so much working across different entities on campus. I mentioned some of these things with the arts and then also certainly Dickey Center I've already mentioned too. So there's a lot of different entities on campus, and I like rounding out this picture of Rockefeller and some of the interests. And Albany, I should have mentioned that. Of course, I was just living in the state of New York. Sometimes Long Island can feel very different than Albany, but I've enjoyed going up there. There's a Rockefeller, at the University of Albany. There's a Rockefeller School of Public Affairs, or I don't know what the proper title is, but so there's another Nelson Rockefeller connection there too. So doing the architectural version of that is definitely on our list too. In working with Christina Javins, there's a lot of resources in Westchester County of New York with the Rockefeller, estates have been and whatnot. And so there's an opportunity to kind of go through some of their archives when those open up again.
When they open up. And an alum, this may open a few other people's memories, but a few years ago at an alumni event, I ran into a guy that had worked for the radio station, and he said, oh, when I was a student and we were, and Dartmouth was playing, I think it was a basketball game, and maybe it was at Syracuse, but it was somewhere near where Rockefeller was living at that point, and he was governor, and he was there at the game and invited the radio announcer and a bunch of the Dartmouth guys back to his house and in a limousine, and all had the students over for beers and everything. So the alum remembered that fondly.
Yeah, I mean, I hope to do, well, again, when we can get back to, actual events. We did, by the way, some creative outdoor events where the provost challenged us. So we did some election night parties in tents around campus, 5 or 6 tents, and it was pretty cold, but students made it out. So that was a fun experience. But I'm hoping to have more people, especially as we get back, alumni coming through for graduation weekends, football games, whatnot, is to do more things that are taking us, to all around campus, and hopefully the Rockefeller Center will be a part in that too. So hopefully I will see a lot of you in that.
So Jason, I mentioned the Dartmouth Alumni Magazine, so just in case you're wondering. So Daniel Webster, #1, Dr. Seuss, Robert Frost, Robert Smith, Salmon Chase. You get your picture on the $100,000 bill, I guess you're in the top 5. And then Thaddeus Stevens, and then Nelson Rockefeller. That's your top 7. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so you got some, it's not just political then, Frost.
Right.
You've got some cultural icons as well. Dr. Seuss. So yeah, Fred Rogers, he'd probably be somewhere, influential as well. So on that list. Yeah, so we'll have to do that. That might be something. This survey that I talked about is, I'm envisioning it as sort of, a cross section of the, American electorate plus Vermont, New Hampshire. But there might be opportunities to dive into Dartmouth alumni too, and to try to see what the alumni poll would be on those sorts of things. That'd be a good question to ask. At any rate, I'm hoping that there's, bringing attention back to Nelson Rockefeller and this, different ways of looking at his political career, and then these paths, these alternate universes, really, that we could have been on. He didn't prevail, but he came close to winning the 1964 convention. I've got the actual convention votes here, and so just fascinating. Goldwater, of course, winning that, but Scranton was there, Romney was there, so lots of different folks sort of vying for that, different political world in many ways. Any other questions?
Just one other comment. I was intrigued with Merrick Garland's comment about his habit, he hoped, was to understand before disagreeing, and when disagreeing, do it without being disagreeable. And I wondered if Nelson Rockefeller had that same predilection.
Yeah, I mean, he was not afraid to jump into, situations where people didn't necessarily agree with them. And so that sort of perception comes out from these biographies I mentioned. So I encourage you to kind of look into that. I'm feeling, he was in a lot of different, in and around many different important moments in history. And I think he would kind of adopt that same Merrick Garland, perception of trying to find the common ground, trying to work towards solutions. He was very action oriented, really hated just, was very interested in thinking through everything, and doing the task force and everything like that, but really wanted results, and really kind of, for him, he was never like being constrained by money because, his personal experience, but also did a lot of very creative financing in the state of New York in terms of how they did their state budgeting to kind of make some of these things happen.
So Kim, would you like to wrap things up as our introducer?
Sure.
Put you on the spot.
Put me on the spot. So thank you, Jason, for taking the time to join us this evening. I'm hoping there wasn't other people with Zoom login issues tonight, but we have this recorded, so we can share it with those who request that. So thank you all for joining us tonight, and we hope to gather around in person. And Jason, I hope you'll join us again and in one of the future events, and hopefully in person in the fall.
Yeah, no, it's been a delight. Thank you so much. Please check out Rockefeller Center programming, and I'll look forward to being an audience member for some of these in the future. So thank you so much.
And Jason, you have absolutely proven to the Hoyts that we need more books in our bookcase. So thank you.
I can learn this.
Good night. Thank you.
Night.